This is for Thursday, March 16th to catch us up after the ACT coding went too long. 6 hours going to do notes like normal, but this is for third hour since they missed this morning. So also with the project that's happening, please make sure that you email me, or if you want to try to contact me today with what election you want. I'll let you know if it's been taken or something, but you can still do that today if you would like. Just email me or text me through a reminder, whatever the case is. But we're going to do a normal day's worth of notes, and then tomorrow we'll resume from wherever the video stops today. Also, too, to follow up from yesterday, we talked about that memorandum from the National Security Council. I looked up the number. The memorandum was called NSC 68. So if you want to fill in your notes, NSC 68, not 20. So I was wrong on that. But anyway, if you look that up, you can find it and see how influential it was. All right, so today we're picking up, should we all be new, this is the Cold War in Asia, where we're going to see containment does not work as effectively. So I'm going to get a little closer here so you can see this. All right, so containment proved more difficult here in Asia. Post-World War II, the old imperialist systems collapsed in Southeast Asia and India, meaning that France, Britain, the Dutch, the Germans, and so on had all lost their colonies essentially here in these Asian countries. Due to different cultures and negative views of Western culture, they were less responsive to the U.S. Like whenever we get involved in Vietnam, they're not going to have anything to do with us because they were under French colonial rule for so long, which is why they were so heavily resistant to us. So Japan became the most closely tied to us because of the post-war reconstruction we had there, but we had a lot of issues with a lot of other areas. So let's look at Japan first. Unlike Germany, U.S. was solely in control of Japan once the war ended after World War II. We appointed General Douglas MacArthur to take control of the reconstruction of the country. So MacArthur was put in charge of redoing the government, making a constitution, and helping rebuild their economy, which he does for about 5 or 6 years or so after the war ends. Japanese generals and Hideki Tojo were tried and executed for their war crimes, as we mentioned in the past. MacArthur helped to establish a new constitution, which today is still around. In fact, they still call it the MacArthur Constitution there, which creates a parliamentary democracy. So they do create a democracy, but a parliamentary format in 1947. The emperor remained the head of state, which he still is, but he had to renounce his divinity, so he can only claim that he's a god. So he lived, Hirohito lived until the 1980s. His son Akihito is the current emperor of Japan. They also renounced war as an instrument of national policy and provided only limited military. So now basically America to this day serves as Japan's military. They have a very limited military development. So most of their attention can go to focusing on the economy and industrial buildup and those kind of things. So Japan needs, as of today, still needs America's protection, which is why we have bases there in Japan. Our occupation ended in 1951, and Japan gave up Korea as well, which we'll come back to Korea later on, and other Pacific islands it claimed. So basically Japan only controls Japan now. The U.S. kept only military bases there for protection, and Japan has remained our strongest ally in Asia as a result. They're still one of our best allies now, too. All right, the Philippines and the Pacific. So as we said, on July 4th, 1946, the Philippines will become independent, as promised. So just like we had said back under FDR, July 4th, 1946, the Philippines become independent as they are independent today. But America keeps military bases there throughout the Cold War. So there's military bases placed in the Philippines, which are still there. The U.S. also had control of UN trustee islands in the Pacific from Japan. So America was looking more. So the Pacific was looking more like an American lake, meaning that a lot of the islands that Japan had in the Pacific, whenever they did their imperialism days, America became a overseer of. So basically, meaning that many islands in the Pacific were controlled or influenced by America. So that's why the Pacific kind of becomes like this American-dominated area. It becomes like an American lake because of how many territories we control and how many areas we influence. But the big event we want to talk about here is with China. China has a major revolution take place, and this is also a big element of the Cold War under Truman, too. Since the late 20s, Chiang Kai-shek and the Nationalist Party have been in charge of China. China had gotten rid of the dynasties back in around 1912, and so they're kind of a republic now. But by the 1920s, they've kind of developed into these different factions. It's not one united government. The most united part of China, the most united government, was led by a guy named Chiang Kai-shek, who led what was called the Nationalist Party. This is Chiang Kai-shek right here in the military uniform. But there's a lot of areas where he didn't necessarily have direct control because of warlords and those kind of things controlling various parts of it. So China was still fairly weak and not united, but no longer had dynasties, though. During World War II, as we mentioned before, Japan invades China and takes over lots of parts of it. And so the guy who we help out in China the most is Chiang Kai-shek. We give lots of weapons and resources and money to Chiang Kai-shek throughout the war. So China does serve as one of our main allies in Asia, but again, they only really fight in China itself against the Japanese. So what was happening in the 30s, right before the Japanese showed up, was that these factions in China were beginning to war with each other. The most famous of which is with Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist and Mao Zedong's Communist Party, or Communist. And so these guys were having a civil war in China, and then Japan invades, and so they kind of put aside their differences, and they all fight against the Japanese. When the Japanese are evacuated in 1945 and the war comes to a conclusion, these sides go back into a conflict. So China goes back into a civil war from 1945 to 1949. So this is like the second phase of their civil war from 1945 to 1949, where the two leaders being Chiang Kai-shek, who rules most of China and was the main ally of us in World War II, and then he controls what's called the Nationalist Party. Mao Zedong was the communist who had who basically all his followers are up here in the Manchuria area, and he's going to gather all this support from here, and they're going to fight and war with each other over the next 4 years. The Nationalists were slowly losing support as each year passed because they had runaway inflation and corruption. A lot of that money that we gave them got misused and mishandled. In fact, we gave them a couple $1 billion. We gave them, what would it be? We gave them a couple $1 billion over the course of that time, and 80% of that went to the communists because a lot of that got mishandled and pocketed and so on. So a lot of the money that we were trying to give the Nationalists and to Chiang Kai-shek to help their forces, most of that money got pocketed and used by the communists instead. And Mao Zedong was a lot more appealing to the regular Chinese peasant. Chiang Kai-shek was a dictator, and he was not that great to his people. So he didn't come off as that caring towards the regular peasant. Whereas Mao Zedong's messages and speeches were trying to encourage peasants to work together and help overthrow the government and become a people-led country and so forth, like a lot of the communist doctrine. And here you see a picture of Mao Zedong here and here. So Mao Zedong had a much better organized communist group than what the Nationalists had, and he appealed to a lot of the average peasants, the landless peasants, who would like to get more prosperity under a new government. So our U.S. policy towards all this is that Truman sent George Marshall in 1946 to negotiate an end to their Civil War, but the compromise fell apart. By 1947, Chiang Kai-shek's forces are on the retreat. They're losing. So basically, as the war happens, the communist forces push down, and Chiang Kai-shek's forces are losing territory as each year passes. Truman ruled out a large-scale invasion. We decided we were not going to invade China. We were not going to go to war with any part of China. And so in 1948, he asked Congress for $400 million to help out the Nationalists, which they gave. But like I said, about 80% of the money we gave was given to, ended up falling in the wrong person's hands. They ended up falling in the communist side and not the national side. So what you have then, what happens is you get two Chinas, basically. By 1949, Mao Zedong's forces, the communists, won. So Mao's forces, the communists, win this civil war by 1949. So Chiang Kai-shek's forces have to flee out of China to go to this island called Taiwan, also known as Formosa. So they leave to go to Formosa or Taiwan in 1949. Chiang Kai-shek then goes to Taiwan. That's all he can go now because he lost the rest of the mainland. So while in Taiwan, he creates a government there which he calls the Republic of China. Like, he basically carries his government over to China and refers to it as the Republic of China, the one that we will still recognize. The Mao and his people will create a new government inside of mainland China. So Mao owns all of mainland China, which it still does today. They call it the People's Republic of China as a result. So Chiang Kai-shek claimed to be the true government of China. We refused to recognize Mao in the People's Republic of China until 1979. So we will not recognize the communist Chinese government like mainland China until 1979 after some work by Nixon. So in the meantime, we only recognize Taiwan and Chiang Kai-shek's government, which means like in the United Nations, that's very important because in the United Nations, the Taiwan government, the Republic of China under Chiang Kai-shek, that's the one that has the power, not Mao and all his people here in mainland China. So that's the big shift here. Republicans were alarmed by us losing China, and they blamed Democrats. They said this was a failure of containment, that Truman wasn't hard on China. And so Republicans were very much alarmed by what happened here and blamed Truman and Democrats for being soft. And so you see containment's not as effective as in Asia as it was in Europe. This also creates a lot of suspicions back home, like so this is in 49, are there people in the government who might be sympathetic towards communism? Thus, it helps to launch the Red Scare. So the Red Scare in a lot of ways is affected by China because people think, well, the Democrats are too soft. Does that mean they're communists? And so people begin to look into this idea of like, are people spying on us in the government for communism and so on. Also, then in 1950, Stalin and Mao signed what's called the Sino-Soviet Pact. They signed what's called the Sino-Soviet Pact, which is not a treaty you really have to know about, but it seemed like it was further proof of a worldwide communist conspiracy. When this Sino-Soviet Pact was signed in 1950, it wasn't really like an alliance like NATO was, but it was more like, let's work together kind of a pact, kind of a deal. But it made a lot of people more suspicious of communist influence and communist spying and a conspiracy of communism take over the world, and it just made things like the Red Scare and the Cold War worse, even though the Soviets and the Chinese don't really get along with each other long term. They really don't have the same ideology when it comes to communism. So we're going to stop there for our first video. We're going to go to the next video and pick up with the Korean War. This is the end of video 1.